We have the beginning of the clean energy revolution, maybe. So China is building thorium reactors. This is technology that has been acquired from the US, I believe. But let's talk about this in more detail. So, Lucas, I know you've been looking into thorium reactors as the next generation of clean energy. So let's talk about this in a bit more detail.
I am. I have. I'm very interested in thorium reactors, and um, this might come as a surprise to you. You know, I'm a little bit bearish on nuclear power, but the main reason that I'm bearish on nuclear power is because of the vulnerability that nuclear power plants have in the current configuration that we use them as, and those are generally water cooled uranium reactors. And some of the political facts around those reactors make them uh, I see them as problematic. But I recently saw that China had managed to the innovation that they reached as a milestone recently was to refuel their thorium reactor, and China had been researching and developing a thorium reactor in the wake of the Fukushima disaster. Um, after the Fukushima disaster, and for those who don't remember, there was a nuclear power plant in Japan, uranium power plant that was water cooled. And after an earthquake hit Japan, they were unable to end the nuclear reaction that was going on. And
I remember this. They actually had to have individuals go in there and sacrifice themselves to help make the graceful shutdown of what was happening at Fukushima. That was a really tragic accident.
it was tragic. I watched it unfold in in a little bit of horror. And not only did I think it was four engineers had to go in to make adjustments to pull the nuclear fuel rods, or bury the nuclear fuel rods while the reaction was going on. But they also had to bring in seawater because part of the design of these uranium plants is, or many of them is to rely on water to cool the nuclear reaction until it gets out of control. And if the water all boils off in steam, and there's nothing left, well, this is one of the problems that they had. So it being right next to the sea, they both they drew on salt water from the sea, in desperation to cool the reactor off, and they also released a massive amount of radioactive water into the ocean because they couldn't hold all of the water, um, whenever they had to add all this water in from the sea. So, anyways, in the wake of Fukushima, and fun, not fun, but a very interesting saga to look into. Chernobyl, I should also add, when I was, I believe, 6 years old, maybe 7 years old, Chernobyl melted down in the USSR. And so I also remember um, being being fixated on the television and watching the reports, reading the National Geographic article in the wake of that disaster. So part of my reticence to be very excited about nuclear is having that experience as a child, and also realizing as I paid attention to that, which I was so geekily fascinated by as a child, to learn more about the extent of that nuclear disaster, the cesium cloud that floated over Europe, and some of the long-term effects that happened there.
We've had these really big disasters from the complex style nuclear reactors, the old style ones, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. There's been a variety of these things which have occurred because the reactors that have been built in the past are pretty complex, and if they don't have all of the support apparatus maintained, if they don't stay intact, you get what exactly happened at Fukushima. So there was an ancillary natural disaster which happened, which then all made all the safety systems that were at Fukushima not operable, and then that's when they had the meltdown. So thorium's different though, right? Is that they don't need as much of this type of support infrastructure, or like what's the big difference on thorium?
Well, so it's not necessarily thorium that is different, but there's another design for a reactor that's called a molten-salt reactor. And so rather than relying on pressurized water to transfer the heat from the nuclear reaction away from that reaction from the core, they rely on molten salt instead. And the molten salt does not have to be pressurized. And you can also, we have this concept of fuel rods in these pressurized reactors, but in molten salt reactors, the radioactive fuel is actually dissolved into the salt. Now, we should ask ourselves, and this gets to the political side of it. Why were not molten salt reactors chosen during the the initial excitement and research and development of nuclear powered generation? And I would say that the answer there is twofold. In one part, you have the corrosiveness of salt, and so when you have salts, especially salts at high temperatures, they react with metals. It's a design problem to figure out metals that do not corrode, and also what the maintenance schedule for the components of that reactor, so that you don't have you don't have the reactor rusting apart. The other thing that we have to think of, and I think is actually more at the heart of the reason that we are not familiar with the molten salt design and thorium as the fuel for a nuclear reaction instead of uranium, goes towards nuclear weapon production. And the thing about thorium reactions versus uranium reactions is a byproduct of uranium reactions is plutonium. And thorium does not have a byproduct of plutonium. And at a time whenever part of the excitement and the politics of the world was a amassing of nuclear weapons, countries were more interested in having nuclear power plants that had the bonus of producing plutonium. And so many of the countries of the world that were interested in nuclear power were also interested in nuclear weapons. And we recently saw at the Munich Security Conference, J.D. Vance made a couple of remarks that gained some notoriety. One of the remarks that he said was, name a country that has a nuclear power program that doesn't have a nuclear weapon program. And there might be some countries who have a nuclear power plant, but he was speaking to a greater political truth, which is that indeed part of the choice of uranium over thorium had everything to do with nuclear weapons. And as we've come to a point in the world where we question this idea of mutually assured destruction, and we also see a wave of military innovations that have an understanding of dialed back military attacks and more guerrilla and more asymmetrical warfare. We can see an opening for countries that truly have an interest in high in more power generation in their country, and yet not be using their nuclear power generation as an excuse to gain a nuclear weapon. And one country that really comes to mind.
Uranium reactors, in some ways, provided a cover for the production of plutonium, and then the plutonium was used to stockpile nuclear weapons, and this was the deterrent, or it was viewed as the deterrent towards some type of world war. If I recall, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction was, if every country that could potentially participate in a world war had nuclear weapons, then that would be the deterrent to the next world war.
Yes, and as countries came to find out that having a nuclear weapon didn't necessarily mean that they were going to hold off imperial designs. I mean, the United States circumvented that hard power with soft power, with their policies with the dollar and their policies for regime change. So again, I think we're coming out of that era of soft power, and also coming to a point where, again, we have questions with regard to our reliance on electricity and desires for alternatives to coal or solar or other renewable or uranium reactor production. So again, I like one we have Iran. As I look at, I should say, let's turn to Iran. The United States and Iran are threatening some sort of war, and yet they've entered into talks. But the sticking point in those talks is their nuclear power production program. And it was very interesting to me to see this announcement from China. One, going back to China, it was no surprise to me to see China take advantage of the United States release after Fukushima. The United States released their information that they had the research and development they had done on molten salt reactors and thorium reactors back in the 60s. And part of that was an eye towards the problem of uranium nuclear proliferation in the world, and also the energy needs of countries in the world. So China took that and has spent the years since then developing thorium molten salt reactor power. And by the way, this is a small modular reactor too. These back in the 60s, one of the molten salt reactors that the United States had was used on a ship, and so we could also think not just about a diversified grid with more nuclear reactor stations that aren't these massive 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, massive power generation stations, but smaller and more diversified reactors, something the size of a shipping container.
So on the thorium reactors, is China perfected the technology, or are they just one of the first ones that have put this into practice? It seems like this technology was first developed by the United States, and then they open sourced it. Is that the right word for it? Just released it out to the public, and the Chinese jumped on it and said, "Well, let's see if we can get this thing to work."
Well, the quid pro, I don't know about perfected, because I'm not sure that I'm not sure that perfected is achievable. But what
operationalize maybe is a better word.
Yeah,
There's something here. They made an advancement.
They've made a lot of advancements, and they have been their paradigm of the use of thorium reactors was going back to their Belt and Road Initiative, being able to supply other countries that had requirements for the generation of electricity. They were going to manufacture these reactors and supply them to countries that they have relations with. Part of the quid pro quo, or the agreement with the open sourcing is a good word for it, but the release of American research and development of these of thorium reactor technology was that the advancements that other countries made had to be shared with everyone. So, I've seen some reports in the wake of this achievement of the Chinese thorium reactor being refueled without being powered down as the theft of American tech, but that is that is a histrionic claims that are not based in facts.
Yeah, I thought there was a good quote in this article, and I've got it right on the screen here, where it says the US left its research publicly available, waiting for the right successor. We're the successor. We mastered the technique. So, at least the Chinese claims are that this technology, which was published and pioneered in the United States, has now been operationalized and found to have some level of success in China. And I imagine that hot on the heels of this, that if they've if these claims are found to be correct, which this happened mid last year, and then late into Q3, Q4 of 2024, that this might be the way that China starts to roll out a massive amount of power generation. Now, I'm curious as to how that'll actually go, because in France, we know that they've got a surplus of electricity and they're sort of wanting for what they're going to do with it. So, maybe the Chinese have a lot more power hungry desires with all the manufacturing that they've got going on, and perhaps aluminum production or something like that.
Well, China does have a massive amount of energy production, and that's part of the reason that the world relies on them for making things like steel and for uh, refining so many metals and elements that we also use in the production of electronics.
But they traditionally did that with coal. I think that was the primary way that China's been doing a lot of that energy production. Isn't that what the big complaint was during all those Paris Accord talks that happened during the 2000s, that they said that the Chinese were just using dirty energy? Is this China's turn from coal towards nuclearization?
Well, even at the time of those talks, it was disingenuous for leaders of other countries to complain about China's reliance on coal whenever the production of materials that all of these countries that were these, especially Western and European countries, America and European countries, were complaining about, when they were relying on China for the production of the steel and the electronics that they were using. But in response to that, maybe not in response to that, but in response to concerns about climate and also energy in independence, China has been diversifying their energy production. So the solar and other renewable generation, even hydroelectric power, China's done a very good job in diversifying their energy. And I would say part of them taking the vanguard in the research for thorium nuclear production has been a part of that a part of that a part of their energy diversification, I should say, and also just an understanding that the more energy that they produce, then the more that they the more options that they have in their economic production. So
Yeah, I
um,
think it's been said that there is no rich country that doesn't have a surplus of energy. And this is one of the things that President Trump has looked at, particularly with the production of steel in the US and putting tariffs on things, is that he wants to see more of these types of metal refinements come back to the United States. This was something that the United States has done a lot of in the past, and so if there's a desire to return to this, the US is going to have to follow along with probably increasing its energy production, and hopefully we don't do that with coal and just return to fossil fuels. Do you think that the US will follow suit and build on top of the advancements that the Chinese have pioneered here with the mastering of thorium salt reactors?
I mean, I expect that the United States, and part of the upcoming trade deal with China, will be about the purchase of thorium reactors from China. I don't know that the United States. I wonder at the timeline that it would take the United States to be able to produce a thorium reactor. I would guess that it would be 20 20 years. But that's a guess made out of ignorance. I think it more important to again go back to a looking at the political calculus that is going to be made by politicians who understand energy needs, the vestigial nature of mutually assured destruction and nuclear weapons, and what the promise of the thorium reactor power might be. So again, when I think about what a smart politician or a good politician might be bringing to the table in Iran, is having discussions about Iran moving their nuclear power production over to thorium and away from uranium, because that gives them the window of having more electrical power, more energy independence in their country, and also removes the threat of plutonium nuclear weapons being made there. And it would also be, I don't know, a coup de grace, not a coup de grace, to bring China into the synergy of that sort of an agreement. Um, and so if if conflict is to be avoided in Iran, and I don't know that the United States has the upper hand when it comes to our military, and nobody wants to see these nuclear weapons be used, then it would seem to me that some sort of agreement with the Chinese producing thorium reactors and either sharing that technology with, or actually devoting some number of production of thorium reactors to Iran would be an ideal solution.
Well, one thing that it got me thinking about was who actually has the thorium, and it's so shocking. Like every time I go and think about who's got the mineral deposits, Australia is always top of the list. It's somehow that country and that little island, that they exist on, seems to have deposits of things that the world always needs. But well, here we are with the United States right on the list as well. So India having a substantial amount of thorium, but China surprisingly doesn't really appear on this list. So if China is going to pursue this technology, it looks like they're going to need to make a deal with India.
Well, actually, thorium is a much, much more abundant element than uranium, and China has a massive amount of thorium in their country. I'm not sure why it doesn't appear on this list, but the United States has thorium pretty much. It's such a more abundant and more refinable element that part of one of the main perks for it is the abundance of thorium. And which, an aside, you know, the United States had a small amount of uranium production, but where was most of the uranium of the world located? Um, Peru, in the Andes. And part of American concerns about South America back in the Cold War was about securing that supply of uranium. Um, so again, I think there's a whole lot of the political tension in the world came to this both the scarcity of uranium and the byproduct of uranium nuclear production. And those have not been good things for Peru or for the rest of the world. The United States has, I think that the greatest deposit of thorium in the United States is on the border of Montana and Idaho. I think that's the Bitterroot Mountains there. In the Lemhi mining district there. So we have thorium in the United States. China has thorium. I think Iran must have a massive amount of thorium. They usually have uh, they have a lot of interesting radioactive mountains and areas in Iran. Actually, naturally, they have natural radioactive hot springs in Iran. So,
Not the kind of place I think you wanna bathe.
people actually go to it for. I mean, humans can withstand some amount of radiation. If when we go out into the sun and create vitamin D with the melanin in our skin, we're actually using radioactivity to give vitamins and health to our bodies. I used to live. You mentioned the 3 Mile Island. I lived in a town in western Colorado that was next to Uravan, Colorado, which was raised RAISED after the 3 Mile Island accident. And it was probably the largest uranium producing area in the United States. And people in that town, there was a lot of old uranium miners, and they kept cartonite rocks in their house because they swore by the health benefits of having a hot rock underneath their bed. Literally, a lot of them would place a rock of cartonite underneath their bed. Health benefits, even
I
uh,
I can't imagine that as a guy. There are certainly types of radioactivity that's a little bit more benign, but yeah.
well, carbonite, the uranium in carbonite is, part of the energy requirement of the uranium reactor production is the refinement of that. So there's not a lot of uranium in it. I was going to say there's at the time of the advent of people beginning to understand radium, there was a man in New York City made radium elixir, some sort of a drink with radium in it, and I think he actually lost his jaw from drinking it, radiation poisoning. But um, anyway, we have a lot of thorium around the world, a lot of benefits to thorium reactors. Uh, there are other aspects. Uh, uh, I guess the other thing that I should mention is I started out with this discussion with the concern about military vulnerabilities of nuclear plants, and we see this with Zaporizhia in the Ukraine, and part of the Fukushima, and maybe even like Germany's decision to close down their reactors was an eye towards the future and concerns about some sort of conflict coming with Russia. But if you have a nuclear power generating station in which reactions can go out of control and take a long time to cool down, that's part of the issue. And with Chernobyl, um, after the reaction became unstable, part of the problem that happened there was the containment building. All the water boiled off, and then the water H2O separated into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen created a massive explosion at the top of the building and blew the top of the building off, and all of the cesium and xenon poisoned gas cloud blew over much of Europe. So whenever a molten salt reactor goes out of control, the reaction uh, requires a now I can't think of the word, catalyzation, requires catalyzation. So I think some small amount of uranium has to be added to it to begin the thorium reaction. But if the if the if the if the reactor melts down, they actually have built into the design of it an ice block underneath, or something that actually cools the radioactive salt. And instead of having a massive hydrogen cloud build over the reactor from the water boiling off, you get the salt melts through the reactor and drops down below and does not turn into a gaseous form. So one of the problems with that dispersal of radioactive elements through a massive explosion is ameliorated. So more bonuses with thorium reactors and molten salt reactors. But I don't know if you guys have any questions. But that's sort of all that. The main points that have caught my eye with regards to thorium nuclear energy production.
I just wanted to add one thing real quick, Lucas. When I was thinking about radioactive and nuclear technology, one of the things that I think about is a long time storage and the kind of the consequences of using that kind of technology and having the half-life being so long with these different elements. And one of the things that we were discussing when I was talking to you was that the half-life of thorium and the reactions of the thorium is a lot less significant than the nuclear uranium reactions that we're having right now, and that the storage wouldn't be such a thing that would prolong future generations. That's one of the things that I worry about is when we think about the nuclear storage is it's for so many years, and we've humans have really only been significant on this planet for what, maybe 4 or 5 thousand years. I don't really want to get too technical with it, but when we're thinking about the half life and the consequences and the life that we had to deal with the uranium, it's hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, absolutely, and plutonium has the longest half-life there's also these different isotopes of the various actinide elements, but plutonium has by far the longest. Uranium, plutonium, I believe, is measured in the billions of years. That's a problem. Uranium, some of the isotopes are more in something like 500,000 years. But the thorium byproducts, which I think is proactinium and I forget what else, but that they are much shorter. I think they might only be 5,000 years, which is still a long time, but a lot, but orders of magnitude less. And I think that the stability of the thorium byproducts is also a lot higher than some of the byproducts of uranium reactions. And by that, you get too much plutonium together, it's so highly unstable that you can have a gamma ray reaction begin just by putting too much plutonium close to it, and it achieves criticality. So yes, there's a lot of benefits with regards to just long-term safety with thorium also.
Fascinating subject. I'll definitely keeping an eye on the developments that happen. This was things that were late breaking in the latter part of 2024. So as this technology is demonstrated to be successful in China, we'll have to see how much this gets out. I'm gonna have to check into that USGS survey in a bit more detail, because it was done in 2011, I think, when we were looking at that map. So maybe there have been deposits that have been found recently in China, but I'm a little surprised that you're saying that China's got this massive amount of it when it was so missed in that 2011 survey. So I feel like I ought to check into that, because I know I'm curious about it.
Well, and you mentioned the USGS survey. We love to talk about politics here. It is on the grounds of surveying the Western lands that the federal government of the United States has made a legal claim towards not redispersing all of that land back to the states. But that's a different conversation. But certainly, the federal government has been very interested in what minerals and what the land was best for from their acquirement of that. So but there's a lot of thorium out there. So maybe you should buy a mining claim in western Montana. That might be the move.
That might be the next move. All right. Well, fascinating subject, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.